Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is the Breaking Free Show. And I'm so happy to be here with you. I feel like my face is just exploding with a smile. I'm so glad to be here. So I hope all of you are doing well and enjoying the summer wherever you are. And here in the States, getting ready for July 4th, our Day of Independence. That means a lot, doesn't it? So we're going to have a wonderful show today. I just want to remind you all, anytime you want to call in, and you will want to, 919-518-9773, or you can come in on Skype at Computers 2K Voice. That will be audio, not video. And we have a chat. It's live. You can comment, ask questions in there. Just put your name under the video. It could be your nickname, pen name, whatever name you choose. And we are monitoring it and having a great conversation in there. So please feel free to join us anytime. So before we get on with our show, I want to say hi to Amnan.
Hello, Marilyn.
And how are you?
I am just fine. And you?
I'm doing good. Did you have a good week?
I had a good week
Yeah,
and the
and
beginning of a great new one.
that's exactly right. It's nice today.
It is. I mean, it's going to be hot. It is hot,
I
but
know
it
it's
was
hot.
nice this morning.
I know. It
Very
was really nice this morning. I was
Yeah.
sitting on my screened-in porch
Yep.
doing some work and just overlook a little pond and I could hear the water and it was just really lovely.
Yep.
So it was good. Okay, so on with our show. I want to introduce my guest to you today, April Young Bennett. And April, welcome to our show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you for being here all the way from Utah. Right?
That's right.
So tell everyone who you are.
I'm an author and an activist. I was an activist first. I care a lot about issues, about many different issues, about healthcare, about education, about preventing poverty. And as I looked at all these different issues, one common factor is that how we treat women in our society really makes a difference in all of these factors. And so for the last several years, I've been working really hard to improve women's rights.
And you are working with a particular organization with particular leaders. Am I right?
That's right.
Okay.
I work with the Exponent 2. That's a Mormon feminist organization. I've also been a leader of Ordained Women, which is working to increase the chances that our religious faith will ordain women. Currently, it's a male only religious tradition. And I also host the Religious Feminism podcast, which is a podcast where women of many different faiths can talk to each other about opportunities to collaborate.
And I was going to go from loving what you do backwards. You know what I was going to say? I love everything. And then when you said the podcast and this and that, I mean, I just love everything that you're doing backwards. So let's start kind of with the church. You are a Mormon.
That's right. I'm a Mormon.
So define for our audience about being a Mormon and what does it mean for a woman and what you've kind of taken on. That's three kind of big subjects, but we'll break them down.
Within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the biggest branch of Mormonism, within that church, only men are ordained to the priesthood. And not only that, but virtually every male member of the church is ordained to the priesthood at the age of 12. So it creates a hierarchy in which virtually every male member of our church is higher in rank than every female member. And so that is concerning. That said, there also are some good things for women in our church. For example, in our church, women do speak from the pulpit, which in some other churches they don't. And so it's not all bad, but definitely that's a concern that we have, that we're only ordaining men at this time.
And so I guess my question to you is, so for a woman who you've grown up in the Mormon church, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you decided that, as an advocate, that wasn't working for you. Now, how do you just stand up and say this in such a male-dominated community?
It is difficult. To begin with, I started out, I was just kind of talking to myself. I was expressing my concerns in the form of journal entries that I was not sharing with anyone, just practicing putting words to the thoughts I was having. And I did this for a while, and after a while, that just wasn't enough. I mean, obviously, I wasn't going to make change that way. And it wasn't very satisfying either, just talking to myself. And so I started looking around for opportunities to talk to someone else about the things that I was concerned about. One thing that happened at that time that was very helpful is that I met a chaplain who was a member of my faith. And as a chaplain, she had religious responsibilities, which are unusual for women within my faith. And so she referred me to the organization, the Exponent 2, which was a Mormon feminist organization. At the time, I didn't know Mormon feminism existed. And so I was pretty excited to find out there was such a place. I looked up the website within, 10 seconds of seeing the website. I thought, this looks like the kind of place I'm interested in. So I immediately sent in one of those journal entries as a blog post, and they accepted it for publication. And from then on, I've been writing about my concerns and my ideas for policy changes. And that's how I became more well known and got involved in other things such as the ordained women movement.
So I guess I mean I'm Jewish, so obviously I mean we have different kind of a breakdown of our religion. We have the Orthodox Jews, we have the conservative, and we have the Reform. If I was an Orthodox woman and I said, I don't like it that just men can be rabbis. I want other, then that changes that set. So by you speaking up and saying women should be here and women should be included and it shouldn't be only men, are you changing the religion?
Not exactly. We are proposing some important changes to policy within our faith. Obviously, as women, unfortunately, the way things are set up now, we don't have the opportunity to change our religion. All we can do is lobby for that change and pray for that change, really. So we are encouraging the people who are in charge to make those changes. And that's pretty much what we can do at this point. But we are raising our voices loudly, and I hope those changes occur. If you're talking about our theology,
Mhm.
there's many different ways of looking at the
So
theology.
can you
Some people,
educate us because this is
yeah,
really important.
yeah, some people read the theology as if it says there is supposed to be a hierarchy of men versus women. There's honestly nothing in Mormon scripture that says that the priesthood is only for men. I believe that's just how it's been interpreted over the years and how it's been created through tradition. Our church began during the 19th century at a time when there weren't any churches ordaining women in the United States at that time. And so I think that our practices really are a reflection of the time in which they started and are more traditional than scriptural. However, of course, different people have different interpretations of the theology.
Mhm. So can you be specific? Like what would you like to see women do?
In our church, to have the priesthood, you must have the priesthood to be the leader of the church, to be the president of the church, to be an apostle within the church, to be a bishop, which is a clergy person over a congregation. These are all responsibilities that are currently limited to men because only men hold the priesthood. There's also many opportunities to do ordinance work, which are only limited to men with the priesthood. Right now, women do perform ordinances privately within our temples, which are closed to the public, but public ceremonies such as baptisms, the administration of the sacrament, which is our communion, and wedding ceremonies are only officiated by men who hold the priesthood. And so I would like to see women have those opportunities.
I have a niece who just was baptized in the Mormon church here. And, I'm sitting here now and I'm thought, oh gosh, I should have reached out to her and had her come on the show as well. And I
That would
didn't.
have been great.
It would have been great. I'm going to have to figure that out because I failed to do that, and it's just hitting me now that she is, I think, 20, and she just converted, and
Well,
it
I welcome her.
yeah, and she's a 20-year-old. So, I mean, that's to me, anytime you can uh, bring in the younger population, I think you something's happening.
Yeah. And it's kind of exciting to see newer, younger people entering the church because I think they are more open to the ideas of equality that I'm promoting than some of the older people who are more entrenched in the traditions. And so I think that we're only going to move forward as younger people join the church or become baptized into the church. They're going to bring in these fresh ideas and more perspective from not so much looking backwards towards our older traditions, but towards the future
Mhm.
and new ideas about how we can do things.
So, what is it? An older tradition that when you put some feminism on it, what will it look like?
I think that'll broaden people's perceptions. Right now, our church is run by older white men mostly. Um, Within our church, we actually have a hierarchy where the priesthood holder who has been there the longest in the quorum of the 12 apostles becomes the president. And so that person is virtually always in their 80s or 90s. So these people have been around for a very long time, seeing things how they've been in the past, and sometimes they're very resistant to change. So I think it would be exciting to see as we get further generations in, see some people who maybe aren't so entrenched in those traditions. A lot of the things that we do in our church, there's really no reason why a woman couldn't do them. I
Mm,
would love to see our quorum of the 12 apostles include both men and women. I would love to see our president of the church sometimes be a woman, sometimes be a man, depending on whoever is in that role at the time.
mhm,
I would love to see women leading congregations. That's a really important one, I think,
mhm,
because our local congregations are led by bishops who are always male. And these are the people who actually conduct the clergy work, where they actually meet with people one on one and give them pastoral care, encourage them. They also judge them in some ways. They make decisions about whether they can enter our temples, whether they can participate in our ordinances. And at present, those people are all male. And that's difficult for many women who would relate more to another woman in that seat. And so I think it could only make the church better if women were in those positions as well as men.
You are a brave woman.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome, and I compliment you. Well, I compliment anybody, if woman, man, doesn't matter, for speaking up, for reevaluating what scripture might say, what a rule might say, because, you take a look at it and you go, hmm, who made that scripture up anyway? Who made that rule up anyway? What verbiage are they using to describe whatever it is that they want, and who and why is it that way? You know? So I really I mean, I know that this is very important work. And so the
Thank
women,
you.
you're very welcome. Do you have children? Do you have daughters?
I do. I have 4 children, and my oldest is a daughter.
And
And so that yes, it's very important to me that she is raised in a church that is more egalitarian than the one I was raised in.
Mhm. And is she receptive?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
She's very interested in feminism. She's
Mhm.
grown up with this
Right.
because, well, her and my sons, they've come along with me to protest, to demonstrations. They've been there through these things and they've seen what's going on. And I think they really do care about
Mhm.
equality.
Mhm. So feminism could look different ways in different environments. What does your feminism look like?
My feminism is a form of optimism. It's a belief that change is possible and that we can make that change happen. And so I am working within my faith community, and now I've expanded my work into other faith communities as well, with other like minded people who believe that it's possible to make these changes. Now, when I say it's possible, I also admit I'm kind of a realist that this is a long term project. It's going to take a while. But these are people who believe that there is a chance for us to make a change, and they're willing to do the work to make it happen.
Mhm. Interesting. And then the clergy and the men in your community, how receptive are they?
There are many men within our movement, many men who care about women and men being equal, and many men who want women to hold the priesthood within our church. Now, that said, I I have been through experiences where my local clergy people have tried to punish me for spreading my views. And I know other women who have also been through experiences like that. So it is a difficult road.
And are you comfortable talking about that?
Sure.
So
For example, a few years back, while I was one of the leaders of the ordained women movement, I had a clergy person who made some demands of me. My brother was getting married, and Mormon weddings are typically held within Mormon temples, which is a place you can only enter with your clergy person's approval. And so my local clergy person threatened to bar me from my own brother's wedding if I didn't step down from my role as a leader of the ordained women movement, and if I didn't censor some of my writing about the need to ordain women.
And so what did you do?
This was a difficult situation for me.
Oh, yeah.
I thought about all my different options. I negotiated. I negotiated actually over the course of several months with this clergy person. He had a much longer list of demands when he began. And eventually we whittled those demands down. In the end, I decided that looking around me at the other activists within the movement, there were many people who were ready to take my place on the board. However, there wasn't anyone else who could take my place as my brother's sister. So I decided that I would step down from the board. I did not abandon my quest to ordain women, and I did not abandon the organization. I still am a fervent supporter of ordained women and the need to, and the whole movement itself. But I did choose to step down for, I agreed to do it for 2 years, and which is the length of time that that permission lasts to enter the temple and attend these weddings. And I also agreed to censor 11 posts for that 2 year period, which are now back live. Everyone can read them now. And one thing that's interesting about censorship, and as I've looked at the history of women's feminism, I've noticed that censorship rarely works. Censorship.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting comment, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's almost immediately, as soon as it came out in the news that I had been required to step down from my post and that I had agreed to allow these 11 posts from my blog to be censored, people found them on internet archives and they started sharing them. They probably got many more readers than they would have if they hadn't ever been censored. And if you look at the history, that's almost always the case. Censorship, for those of you out there who want to censor someone, I'll just let you know that doesn't work. It's not a good idea.
No, it's really not, especially now, right?
Right. Right.
So so they really can't censor you.
No, no. Once your words are out there, they're out there. People can find them again. If you censor someone, you just draw publicity towards their cause, which was great. It was wonderful to draw
Right.
publicity towards the
Right.
cause.
So it's
And
free PR.
yeah, let people see in action that if they're going to censor a woman because she's talking about her opinions about who should be ordained, that doesn't look good. It
Right.
actually just attracts more people to the cause and gets more people excited about the movement.
So do you have a fear for your life?
I don't. I'm fortunate that I do live in a very safe society and I have never been physically threatened personally.
Mhm.
So the kinds of things that the kinds of punishments I get are more like, some people might try to bar you from social situations. Ecclesiastical leaders might bar you from ceremonies like wedding ceremonies. But no, I haven't had any physical threats. And so I'm very
Mhm.
grateful for that. One thing about my community, the part of the reason why I don't leave my faith community altogether is because I do believe it is a good community full of good people. And I haven't had experiences where people have tried to threaten me in a way that would do me physical harm.
What were you like as a young girl? As a 10 years old, 12 years old? What was it like for you?
I have always been a feminist on weekdays. I would just set aside my feminism on Sunday when I was supposed to go to church.
Uh-huh.
So I always cared about women's rights. I always cared about elevating women and promoting them. A big change for me, at least in the way I looked at the world, happened when I was 12. That's the age when all Mormon boys are ordained to the priesthood and all Mormon girls aren't. We remain the same. At that time, I happened to be in a Sunday school class with other children my age. And the 12-year-old boys in my class were bullies. They would knock over chairs, throw spitwads, make fun of the teacher, make fun of the girls. They were horrible kids. I hope that they've matured and they're better now as adults. But at that time, they were just rotten. They were rotten. And it started kind of opened my eyes. I started thinking about why would God choose these boys, these terrible bullies, to represent God and to hold God's priesthood, and not any of the people in the classroom who seemed capable of some sort of reverence. And so that really started me thinking, but I didn't actually act on those thoughts until I was an adult.
And what was your answer? What answer did you get?
I eventually came to the conclusion that that wasn't God. It
Mhm,
wasn't God doing that. It was tradition. It was a tradition that didn't need to be that way.
mhm. Wh So, are men in your community were men in your community more bully types or not?
No,
Okay,
no. I I
okay,
I was unusually unlucky with my 12-year-old
okay.
Sunday school class, but maybe it was good because that got me thinking and it led to the person I am today.
So is it possible that because of who you are and how um, marketable you are, promotional you are, how verbal you are, that the more you speak up, the less they will try to censor you? That the more you go the other way, the more inroads you will make? I mean, how can they keep, I mean, besides censoring you, how can they even keep you quiet?
Well, I haven't been censored in many years, and that 2-year period that I agreed to through those negotiations is now long past. And I think I am at a point now where it's more difficult to censor me than it was then.
Mhm.
And I think that people who stick it out in whatever movement you're in, if you just stick it out and keep going, you just become more and more powerful and more of a voice for your cause.
Mhm. Yeah. It's very interesting what you're doing. So I want to just invite anybody on that would like to ask a question and make a comment. 919-518-9773. You can come in on Skype. That's Computers 2K Voice. Or you can join us in our chat and just put your name near our video, ask questions, comment, whatever you like. So who would you say, looking back into history, what is been your role model, mentor, somebody who spoke up, stood out, and that you said yes?
One of the people I really admire from history is Antoinette Brown. Antoinette Brown was the first Protestant woman to be ordained to a priesthood. And that was back in the 1850s. At that time, she was she attended Oberlin College, which was the only college in America where a woman could get a bachelor's degree at the time. And when she finished her bachelor's degree, she applied to continue on for theology studies in divinity school. And they did not know what to do with that because Oberlin College had been built as a radical social experiment where people of all races and all genders would be equal. And they had it written into their charter that women could attend any course on campus. But it also never occurred to them that a woman would want to be a clergy person. And so they just hadn't expected any woman to apply to attend those courses. And once they
Mhm,
did, they didn't know what to do about that. They were just so confused.
mhm,
And she was found herself in a situation sort of like the one I described to you with me, where I was put in a situation where I had to make negotiations and I had to make choices which not everyone approved of, either within my religious community or within my feminist community.
mhm,
She was in a similar situation where the leaders at Oberlin said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll let you attend, but we won't give you a degree. Our charter says we have to let you attend. We'll let you do that, but you won't get a degree when you're done. You can leave in 3 years without a degree.
hmm,
And so obviously, this was not a fair bargain in any way whatsoever. And she found that people were upset on all sides. Traditional people within her religious congregation were upset that she was attending divinity school. People within her feminist community, because she was a strong feminist advocate, people within her feminist community were upset because she had agreed to such an unfair deal to attend school, to pay the tuition, and not get the degree like the men. And so she was in a very difficult position and she worked through it. She often talked about how hard it was to stand alone. She sometimes talked about how she wanted to get a yardstick and kind of put it into her corset to help her stand up straight because she didn't have any people to
right.
support her, anyone to rely on. And so she was all alone in this and she worked hard when she did finish school, not graduating, of course, because they followed through with that. They did not let her graduate. But when she finished school, she started looking for someone to ordain her, and it took a while to find someone. But she eventually did find a congregation that was willing to hire her because she was willing to accept lower pay than a male clergyman would have. But even so, not a great reason. But even so, she got into that first job and she became the first American female clergywoman, which is something that I really admire how she just hounded her way through, even with very little support from other people.
Absolutely. And sometimes you sort of have to realize that you can take what you can make when it's moving forward,
Right.
right? I
Right.
mean, so she got paid less, or she was able to, go to this college without a degree. It's something.
Yeah, one thing that I think that's fun to look back at is that she talks about how years later, decades later, actually, decades later, she says that Oberlin got proud of her. And at that time, they gave her an honorary degree for
Right.
the theology work she
Right.
actually completed.
Right, right, right. That's a riot. And so, I mean, and you talk about the church and the leadership and all of that. What about your immediate family? We mentioned your daughter. What about your sons? I'm making an assumption. Are you married?
I am married,
Okay.
yes.
And what does your husband and your sons think of the work that you're doing?
They're very supportive of me. Um, and I've always appreciated that. One thing that's been kind of difficult for my family is my parents. When I first started appearing on the news talking about demonstrations and talking about activism with regards to Mormon feminism, it's kind of funny. I was in my mid 30s at the time, but my parents started getting calls from everyone, from distant relatives, from neighbors, from where I grew up. Just people were coming out of the woodwork to contact my parents and report on me, I guess, to tattletale or something.
Well, they're having fun with you, aren't they?
Yeah, and they were just kind of, what do we do with this? It was difficult for them, and we kind of talked together, and I kind of wrote a script for them of what to say when they get these phone calls.
Mm.
To tell them, guess what? She's a grown up. You can talk to her directly. You don't need to contact us. Here's her phone number. If you want to talk to her about anything, you call her yourself.
Mm.
But it was a stressful time for them at first, and I really appreciate how they dealt with it.
Well, April, you first of all, you have the cutest smile and the cutest laugh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so you are a very wise woman, and probably, you the way you come off is not a threat. There are some people who in activism and marching, I mean, they say things in a way that maybe they shouldn't say. Or they act in a
That
way, go ahead, what are we going to say? You say it.
Yeah, there is a kind of a stereotype that activists are angry, angry,
Exactly.
scary people.
Yeah.
That hasn't been the case with most of the activists I've met, and I've met a lot because been involved in this work for years. But that is kind of a stereotype that I think people are expecting that, and almost when they just meet you and find that you're a normal person,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're almost surprised by that.
Yeah, you have just such a cute, vivacious kind of giggle, that it's kind of, just kind of, you want to, who is this woman? You know, what is she talking about? You have a great role to play.
Thank you. Yeah, I've met lots of great people who are involved, men and women who are
Hmm.
involved in activism, who are just very personable.
Yeah. So what kind of marches do you march at? Only Mormon
And
marches? I mean, just feminism? What kind?
well, I'm one of many people that was involved in the Women's March,
Okay.
the March on Washington. I'm one of. I've also worked a lot on family-related issues, lobbying my local legislature, and working with national organizations to lobby for better federal laws. And I do a lot of activism within my Mormon feminist community, where we are seeking to talk to the brethren who currently lead our church and encourage them to include women, both in the big picture. I think that women should be ordained and that we should be fully equal with men in our church, but also in smaller steps along the way. There's lots of things that our church has done since we've started doing this activist work to improve things for women. There's lots of policies that have
Like
come over
what? Like
time.
what? Like what?
Well, one recent one, which is actually, well, I'll tell you one that's a little bit funny and one that's more serious. One that's a little bit funny is when I was a missionary for my church. We do have female missionaries. That's that's something that women are allowed to do within our church. And I was a missionary back when I was in my early 20s. And at that time, women were required to wear dresses and ride bikes.
Yeah.
It made no sense. It made no sense
Right.
whatsoever. The costume was not right for the activity.
Yeah. Right.
It was very silly. And it seemed like this was like a policy that had been going on for decades and would never end, no matter what we said. The men in charge thought women should be wearing dresses when they were doing missionary work, even if they were riding on bikes, and it was crazy. And very recently, they finally made a change. Now, female missionaries, you'll see them wearing pants. Yay! At last, it took a
Wow.
while.
Isn't that
Yeah,
something? Well, that is
several years
something.
ago, it's still a tradition in our faith that women wear dresses to church on Sunday. It's not a rule, but it's a tradition,
Uh-huh.
and a heavily enforced tradition socially for some reason. For some reason, some people get pretty upset about seeing women wearing a
A-
nice pantsuit at church. It makes no sense.
And
But
what can they do to that? I mean, what would they do? And how does somebody say, you can't do this? And how do they keep that, you know, that stance?
yeah, if it's people who are just at the church who are annoyed by it, they might, just make rude comments or ostracize the person. Unfortunately, those local clergy people that I mentioned that are all male, they have a lot of power to enforce their own rules. And so this never happened to me, but I know there are some other women who wore pants to church and had their local clergy person say, if you wear pants again, I'm not going to let you attend the temple, sort of what happened to me, or I'm not going to let you hold a calling, which is a sort of a volunteer position within our church. They had different ways of kind of coercing them.
Hmm.
So that's one thing that many of us had wear pants to church day, where we all at once wore pants to church, all on the same
Did
day,
you
to kind of
really?
bring attention, yes, to
And
the
then what
cause.
happened?
And well, since then we have had these changes. Like I
Mhm.
mentioned, it kind of made the press contact church headquarters and actually
Mhm.
ask them questions about, are there rules that say Mormon women can't wear pants at church? And they said, no, there aren't any rules like that. So I think that might help with some of
Mhm.
these local clergymen who are trying to enforce a rule that does not exist. And like I said, more
That's
recently,
great.
even female missionaries had that restriction pulled from them. So that was wonderful.
Mhm. That's
From a
great.
theology standpoint, one of the most important changes happened
Mhm.
very recently.
Mhm.
Within our temples, we have many ceremonies that are conducted privately within our temples, and those ceremonies, in many ways, were very they offer you certain promises, and some of those promises were much more affirming towards men than they were towards women. And so the ceremonies themselves were more affirming of men than they were towards women. And after many, many decades of work for Mormon feminists to try to make changes in that way, very recently they've made some changes that have made the temple ceremonies much more egalitarian and more affirming towards women.
Interesting.
And so I'm very excited about
That's
that.
very interesting. So I know I'm backing up a little bit, but I do want to go
Mhm.
forward too and ask you about your podcast and these other women. But what is the core philosophy or core belief in can you summarize that about being a Mormon?
This the core belief of being a Mormon.
Yeah.
Hmm, I don't know. There's a lot of core beliefs, but basically, it's a belief in Jesus Christ and a belief in continuing revelation that God continues to speak to people on earth.
Okay. So now, as far as the women, the other question I want to ask is, what did you expect to accomplish by the March on Washington? What were you there for?
I was there to show that I am one of many women who are standing together to say that this way of talking about women, this way of thinking about women, this way of treating women is not acceptable in our society today.
Okay. Okay. Touche. Now to the women, the podcast and the group of diverse women from various religions and that come together. Tell me about that and who are some of them? What religions and what are you talking about?
Well, you mentioned that you're Jewish, right?
Yes, yes.
So I have had some Jewish women appear on the podcast. The Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, I just admire those women so much. They are doing so much to improve the Jewish Orthodox community and make it more egalitarian. They support interpreting the scripture to allow as much leeway for women to expand their opportunities and do everything they can within the faith, and setting aside some of those traditions, like the ones in my faith, that really aren't scriptural, that are barring women from doing important things within the faith. So they're an exciting group that I
Mhm.
really admire. I've also worked with Muslim feminists. I recently talked to on the podcast with feminist Islamic troublemakers of North America. I
What is
love
it?
the
Wait,
name
wait,
of
wait.
their
Tell me
group.
the name again. Tell us the name. Troublemakers?
Feminist Islamic troublemakers of North America.
Cool.
Yeah, they said that um, within their faith, they often refer to women as troublemakers, and they do that as sort of or riffing on them basically, and they're saying, no, we're troublemakers in a good way, and they're kind of owning
Yeah,
it.
right, 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 right. And what do you see as happening amongst these various groups? I mean, is there a similarity in what they're working on? Are they all
there
yeah, go ahead.
There is. I think
Okay.
one thing that I've seen that's common amongst all of the different religious faiths of people that I've talked to is that there are different ways to interpret theology. And no matter what the theology is, we may have a different theology from each other as people of different faith communities. But no matter what the theology is, you can interpret it in a way that is more egalitarian, that is more affirming toward women, or you can interpret it in a way that puts women down. And that seems to be almost
Mhm.
universal, no matter what faith you're in, that there's a lot of tradition coming back from our past. Still today in America, we are not fully egalitarian as women. There's still a wage gap. There's still, well, we talked about a president who
Right.
talks about women in certain ways. There's still a lot going on in America. We have the Me Too movement happening because so many women are experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace. So we're not fully egalitarian as a secular society either. But if you look back to our past, say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and further, you see that things were even harder for women back then. And many of these religious traditions that we have stem from a time when women were oppressed in ways we aren't today, fortunately. And they've continued because religious communities are largely exempt from those regulations that prevent people from other things like businesses from and governments from discriminating against women. So since religions are exempt and they have these long standing traditions, you'll find things happening within religious communities that wouldn't happen elsewhere.
Mhm.
And you find a lot of women who are raised in these communities where they're seeing that on their Sabbath day, whichever day that is for them, that they're treated in such a different way than they are the rest of the week, that it really gets them thinking and it gets them motivated. And they get excited about making change and becoming feminists. And
Mhm.
that's not the only way they become excited, because religious communities, they don't only make women mad. Yes,
Yeah.
patriarchy does make
Right.
women mad
Right.
and it does motivate them. But that's not the only thing about religious faiths that motivate women. Many of them are motivated by their faith itself,
Mhm.
because within their faith, they're learning things about right and wrong. They're learning things about social justice. They're learning to have compassion for other people and to care about what happens to them. And these values that they're learning within their religious traditions also motivate them to make the world a better place, and specifically their own religion.
Mhm. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see where the pillars are and how we are uh, how we have to shake them up. And
Hmm.
I mean, look what you're doing. And from the religion that you're coming from to be able to do what you're doing. I mean, it really is extraordinary. And and I see, the Orthodox Jewish women, but of course, being that I see women from the Islamic religion, and you speaking up is so powerful. I mean, just based on what the religion says. Years ago, when I was growing up and you went to an Orthodox synagogue, of course, men and women sat separately. Well, I was taught that the reason women and men sat separately was because men were better, plain and simple. Men were better, But now I've come to realize that is not what some of the Orthodox men were saying. Now they're saying that it's because women are an interruption to the men praying. because
A
of their
distraction.
a distraction. And women naturally know how to pray. Men need the work.
Mhm.
I mean, I've heard it from an Orthodox rabbi.
It's so funny how you hear, coming from a completely different faith community, you hear the same excuses for
Yeah.
barring women.
Tell me. It's okay. What, like what? What are you referring to?
Well, for example, in my community, I am a Mormon, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you look at the history back when the church began and when people first started saying, why don't women have the priesthood? Why only men? The reason was men are better. That's what they said. They don't say that anymore. Nobody says that. That's not okay to say.
So how did that evolve?
So I think it evolved in the 1950s when it's sort of a reflection of the culture that was happening around that time, where they were pedestalizing women and saying, we don't want women in the workforce, not because they're not as good as men, but because they're so special and unique that we want them to have their unique roles.
Right.
And so that's the sort of thing that the church started saying too, that women don't have the priesthood because they're so special and unique and have their unique roles. And also, women are so naturally compassionate and giving and good that they don't need the priesthood
Mm,
to become like
interesting.
men. It's men who need the priesthood to become good people. So you see a lot of the same excuses happening elsewhere. Another thing we do here is the distraction thing. Well,
Mm.
we have a volunteer clergy. What if we had men and women working so close together in the volunteer clergy? The men would be distracted. They start cheating on their wives because they'd be interested in these women they work with. It's the same excuses across faiths, which is
Right.
part of the reason why there's so many opportunities for collaboration
Mm.
amongst different faith communities of feminists, because even if our theology is different, the excuses that we're getting are very similar.
Yeah, but it is showing a crack in the pavement. I mean, to me, now that they're saying this, to me, it sounds better than saying women aren't as good as men. I like
Oh, absolutely.
there's a crack in here, and it's because of women like you that are helping to make that crack, and everybody will be happier, even the men.
Yeah,
Everybody.
it's good to kind of look at how people used. I think that's one of the reasons why I care about history so much. One thing we haven't talked about yet, really, is that I've written a book about feminist history,
Now's
feminist
a perfect
activist
time.
history.
Talk about it.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Here it is, right here. Let's see if we can show it on here. It's called "Ask a Suffragist: Stories and Wisdom from America's First Feminists." And one of the great things about looking at the history is you can see the patterns and you can see the change. It can be a little bit frustrating as an activist when you're saying, I've done all this work and I'm not seeing a lot of changes. But then if you look at the attitudes that people had towards women 100 years ago or 200 years ago, you can see how the work that these feminist
Mhm.
activists have done over the years has really changed perceptions and changed hearts and minds.
Yeah, like you can't see it maybe. They couldn't see it then. We can see it now. The
Right.
same thing with
Looking
your
back,
work. Yes, the same thing for your work. You may not see it in your lifetime, and maybe you will. You'll see some.
seeing
Yeah.
seeing is also kind of a skill that you have
Yes,
to
it
develop.
is.
When if I'm looking at, okay, my goal is that women should be ordained on an equal basis with men, obviously that's not been achieved.
Mm,
So I might look at it and say, oh, we haven't accomplished anything, our goal has not been achieved. But if you develop the skill of seeing the changes,
mhm,
you mentioned the dialogue changing, the way
mhm.
people talk about women changing, just within the decade or so that I've been working as a Mormon feminist activist, I've seen the dialogue changing. I've seen the brethren within my church talking about the priesthood in a different way, a way that's less hierarchical, a way that's more inclusive of women. And I see some of those walls beginning to come down
Right.
so that future generations maybe will have women and men receive the priesthood in an equal way.
Well, you're talking. You're not, back in those 2 years negotiating the right to just talk. I mean, you're talking. You have a whole
Absolutely.
title. And your title is so long, Mormon feminism activist. I mean, that in itself is a mouthful and saying something about the work. I mean, really. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think it also gives men and everybody an opportunity to speak up in a nice way. you know,
Right.
and come to terms. Look,
One thing,
I always believe that the more united, this is my, and I have to think of how I used to say this, the more united we are, the more independent we will be,
absolutely. Absolutely.
right? So the more independent, the more united we are, the more we work together, the more self-esteem we have, the more compassion we have, the more stability we have to be who we are. And that's, and to do whatever work we have to do separately as well.
Yeah, another thing that I like about looking backwards at the suffragist movement,
Mhm.
these women who started American feminism way back when, is they started at a time when they were kind of lone voices.
Mhm.
There were so few of them. So few people who even thought it was a good idea for men and women to be equal. So few people speaking out that they had no choice but to band together.
Right.
They had to find people who agreed with them, people they could work with, and often they didn't agree about very many things. Maybe they agreed that women should have the right to vote, but they disagreed about many other issues. They often came from very different backgrounds. They came from different racial backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds. Many of them were
Absolutely.
immigrants who came from different countries. And so they had very different perspectives. And they might not have been friends under normal circumstances.
Mhm.
But because there were so few people, they had to learn how to get along with those there were. The few activists that were out there, they had to learn how to work together.
Mhm.
And that's something I think we could use a lot more of today. I think we could get a
Definitely.
lot further if we tried to work with people who were different than us.
So let me ask you something. Would it be, excuse me, would it be a possibility for us to put a show together from on my show with video with some of the women from the different religions that you are coming in contact with?
Oh, that would be exciting. That sounds
Well,
great.
I think we should do that. I mean, we could utilize Hangouts, and we could have up to like 9, 10 different places.
That would be exciting. I think that would be a lot of fun.
So let's put something like that together because we have this means to do, a visual,
Hmm.
and I think it would be great to be able to hear from, other women, and at some point we can do it and invite men in too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's another thing. When looking back at the suffrage movement, many of the first people to stand up for women's right to vote were men.
Yeah.
And so we need everyone.
We need absolutely. There is nothing that that we're going to accomplish if we don't open up the room, open up the table, open up our hearts to everybody communicating and understanding whatever the roadblocks are, whatever the fears are, whatever the anything is. We got to talk about it. So share again about your book and where people can find it.
The book is called Ask a Suffragist.
Hold it up again
Stories.
because it's a
Hold
nice
it up.
cover.
Let's
Yeah,
hold it
yeah.
up. Let's see. Can we get it on
There
the
you go.
screen? There we
Yes,
go.
perfect.
Sort
Yeah,
of.
yeah. No, it's great. And where?
Okay, there
Yeah.
we go. And I'm over here. It's called Ask a Suffragist Stories and Wisdom from America's First Feminists. It's available wherever good books are sold. If you want to find it the easy way, go to askasuffragist.com. And there you'll find links to your local bookstore or Amazon or wherever you want to purchase it. And it's available in large print,
Mhm.
regular print, Kindle book, and coming soon to audio. Audio is any second now will appear.
That's great. That's great. And then you do write regularly, right?
Absolutely. So I write regularly. If you go to aprilyoungb.com, you can see links to all my projects, to my podcast, to my blog, and to my Ask a Suffragist books.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'd love to hear more from you.
Good. So, hold on. I just want to invite anybody questions. If you have any question to ask April, please call in, make a comment. Anybody have any personal experiences, please feel free. 919-819, excuse me, 919-518-9773 or computers 2K voice, or you can come in still in the chat and ask us questions there. And you have, hold on one second. I got more questions. You have my thing, my pick. Okay, here are my books, all on Amazon. In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Men. In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Twins. In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Millennials. And soon, in Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of People Impacted by Opioid Addiction. All of these books are full of personal stories, people experiencing life. And my belief is that in order for us to be saved, we've got to understand each other. And that's part of the purpose behind these books, is so that we will understand each other from a different perspective. And we open up our hearts to understanding men, twins, millennials, people that are addicted, and then we go on from there. So the ordained piece is apparent. What other family issues? You mentioned family things. What are some of the family things that you're working on?
One thing that's a big problem for women, it's a big problem for everyone, but particularly for women, is that access to healthcare is not universal in our country still after so long. And that particularly affects women because women are the most women with children. A single woman with children is one of the demographics in our country most likely to end up in poverty and one of the most susceptible to medical bankruptcy.
Mhm.
So, increasing access to healthcare for everyone is really a woman's issue. It's the way that we need to keep ourselves financially stable,
Okay.
not just healthy so that we can take care of our children, but also financially stable so that we can have a roof over our heads.
So, y-
So
so
that's a very
that's
important
so
one.
you don't just focus on being a Mormon and feminism. You are broader than that.
Absolutely. I've been involved in very many different issues with regards to how we can make our communities stronger, which frankly overlaps with feminism almost always.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that makes you even, and with that, it also makes you less threatening.
I don't know. There's a lot of people who are really offended by the idea that say everyone should have access to healthcare.
Well, but I mean, you're not, you're speaking about, you know, you're narrow, but you're also broad. And I think that's,
Absolutely.
that's, you know, that's a good place to come from. I did you have a question? Oh, I do want to ask you, how do you feel about people having multiple wives?
Polygamy was something that within the mainstream church of my religion was let go of well over 100 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm very glad that that was the case. I don't think it was right. I don't think it was ever from God. And so I'm very glad that we haven't practiced that in a very long time. There still are some some smaller Mormon Orthodox groups that still practice polygamy. And I I know there are many people who are working to help those women who are trapped in that situation, which is not a good situation
Mm.
in any way
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Years ago, we had a woman on who had escaped from a cult, and it was a very interesting show. I mean, it was quite a while ago, but it was a very interesting show, and I'm glad to hear what you're saying. And what I was curious about, was there a woman behind that change, or was that and was it more men, or how did that go? Where did that change come from?
There was a lot of pressure at the time because at that time, most Mormons were in Utah,
Right.
and those Mormons wanted to be a state. They wanted to be a state of the United States of America, and there was a lot of pressure from the federal government to give up polygamy.
Mhm.
So, because they didn't want to admit a state to the Union that had what they considered an abomination, I kind of considered an abomination also. They didn't want that as part of the
Right.
United States, and that eventually led to that change.
Gotcha.
Um, it- it's one example of ways that external pressure can actually affect a faith community.
Mhm.
And it's not the only example. So that's part of the reason why we need other people who care about equality to care about what's going on in different faith communities that maybe there aren't their own. I think one thing that we often do is we kind of are like, well, that's their business, their faith, their business. But one thing that we've seen over history is that wherever there's something that's inequitable, that's wrong, that's happening in one community, it brings everyone down. And
Right.
there is there are people within my book, within Ask a Suffragist, who talked about that. They were talking about there were a lot of people who cared a lot about abolishing slavery, and these same people cared about increasing rights for women because they cared about abolishing slavery. And they said, as long as we're holding women down, we don't have moral ground to stand on when we're fighting for the rights of Black men. We need to fight for the rights of everyone to be equal.
But you have definitely found your purpose, haven't you?
I hope so, but I always find more.
Well,
And no matter
get
how much longer you stay within the activist movement, you always find something else that you can care about and contribute to.
Mhm. But the fact that you have found your place within being an activist.
Yeah, I do think that I found my place with being an activist, and I'm happy being an activist. And I think that I feel like I've got a sense of purpose and that I'm doing good in this world.
Mhm. So, what would be some of your final words to the women out here, to just whoever's listening? What would be your final words?
I always want to encourage people not to be discouraged, to let them know that these are long-term projects. If you look at history, you start to see that while change happens slowly, it usually goes in the right direction in the end. And there will be, some backsliding along the way. But in the end, things tend to get better. And so it's worth it. It's worth it to make that change.
Mhm. And it's worth the work.
It is.
It's worth the work. And people are, I think, when you're doing when you're speaking the right talk, and it's the talk of freedom, people people listen. People can say no, but in their hearts of hearts, they know what's right, they know what's true, they know how it should be. So regardless of what somebody might say, I think people really know the difference. And that's where we're working towards. I mean, I think every woman out here, even the women who might not agree with everything that you say, April, or stand for, everybody wants their freedom in some way, shape, or form. So I think we're very, very close to having for it to continue to get better and better, and having it be better and better. I mean,
Absolutely.
with the Me Too movement, and with all the things that are going on, with men standing up and saying Me Too. I mean, we're at a pivotal place when you notice, just like you said, you've got to notice. You've got to notice the small changes. And even if you're not an activist, you're just depressed and sad about what's going on the planet in some way, shape, or form. Really open up and look to see the people that are speaking up, see what's happening, see how far we've come than we were in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. See where we are. That's what I think. What do you think, April?
Absolutely. Pick up my book, Ask a
Pick up your book.
Suffragist.
Hold it up again.
All right. Once again, trying to find my way onto the screen. Here it
There you
is.
go. It's a very pretty color and
Fi-
cover. Yeah.
Yeah, you can find out what it was like for activists back in the 1830s when women first started speaking out for women's rights.
Hmm.
And you can feel grateful that we've come a long way. You can also learn from them. There's so much, we have better technology now, but there's so much about activism that is still the same. We still have to change hearts and minds.
Right.
And those skills that these women developed way back in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, they still apply today.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you very much for bringing all of this to us and to everybody, and to keep doing the work you're doing. And I really want to see about putting this extended show together, part 2.
That sounds so fun. I
Yeah,
think that would be a great
I
opportunity.
think it would be too. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, being here and enjoying our show with April. And thank you, Amnon, so much for everything.
You're welcome.
And everybody out there, it's a really good time. Just notice the small things. Notice who you're talking to. Notice who's talking to you. Just notice how the world is connecting better. It really is. And April, thank you. We'll be in touch, okay?
Okay.
All right. Mwah. Bye, everybody.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.